Georgia Tech science fiction collection now holds more than 10,000 books and complete or nearly complete runs of important magazines, including Analog, Galaxy, and Magazine of Fantasy and Science Fiction. We also have growing collections of fanzines, convention programs, and ephemera. And while most of these items can be used in the reading room of Georgia Tech archives, we are happy to offer an increasing number of these books for checkout through a new circulating science fiction collection, which is located on Library 2 East. And we also have current subscriptions to academic science fiction publications and trade and ban titles like Locus, Interzone, and New York Review of Science Fiction, and those are also available on the second floor. So overall, the science fiction collection supports recreational reading, coursework, and scholarly research on campus and beyond. And Budfoot also brought authors to campus on a regular basis, and I'm happy that the library can offer an author talk today. So on behalf of the Georgia Tech Science Fiction Collection, I'd like to welcome everyone. I hope you enjoy Anthony's talk, and thanks for coming out today.
Thank you. Hey, everybody. Do both of the guys have the mic still working? Excellent. So it's great to be back at Georgia Tech. I spent a very long time here and got my doctorate and everything prior to that at Tech, so I'm very familiar with all the buildings in the campus, as you may know from looking at the books, if you've read the books. I like to, but before I talk about the books, Budfoot was a great guy, and his science fiction course that I took here was a privilege to be able to get his perspective on a field that has changed the course of my life. But I don't write science fiction right now. I have some science fiction coming out next year, but everything I have published recently is urban fantasy. And I like to describe it as urban fantasy for techno geeks because it fills in real locations, real science, made up science, and a whole bunch of other things in them. And rather than describing the series in detail, I thought I would just dive into a reading of the first couple chapters. They're short, so it should go reasonably quickly. Just to set the stage, it's set in an alternate Atlanta that you may recognize. Dakota Frost is a magical tattoo artist, and the first book she appears in is called Frost Moon. And I'll start reading from Frost Moon right now. Frost Moon, a Dakota Frost SkinDancer novel by Anthony Francis. Chapter 1, Dakota Frost. I first started wearing a mohawk to repel lowlifes, barflies, vampires, Republicans, and so on. But when I found my true profession, my hairstyle turned into an ad. People's eyes are drawn by it. No longer a true mohawk, but a big unruly death hawk, a stripe of feathered black, purple, and white streaks climbing down the center of my head. But their gazes linger on the tattoos, which start as tribal vines in the shaved spaces on either side of the hawk, and then cascade down my throat to my shoulders, flowering into roses and jewels and butterflies. Their colors are so vivid, their details so sharp, many people mistake them for body paint, or assume they can't have been done in the States. Yes, they're real. No, they're not Japanese. They're all, with a few exceptions, done in my own hand, right here in Atlanta at the Rogue Unicorn Little 5 Points. Drop by, I'll ink you. Ask for Dakota Frost. To attract the more perceptive eye, I started wearing a sleeveless, ankle-length leather coat vest that shows off the intricate designs on my arms, and a cut-off top and low-rider jeans that show off a tribal yin-yang symbol in my midriff. Tying it all together is the black tail of something big, curling up the left side of my neck, looping around the yin-yang, and arcing through the leaves on my right shoulder. Most people think it's the tail of the dragon, and they wouldn't be wrong. In case anyone misses the point, I even have the design sewn into the back of a few of my vests. Those who live on the edge might notice a little more detail. Magical runes woven into the tribal designs, working charms woven into the flowers, and if you look real close at the tail of the dragon, the slow movement of a symbolic familiar. Yes, it did move, and yes, that's real magic. Drop by the Rogue Unicorn. You're still asking for the one and only Dakota Frost. the best magical tattooist in the Southeast. The downside to being a walking ad, of course, is that some of the folks you want to attract start to see you as a scary lowlife. We all know that vampires can turn out to be quite decent folk, but so can clean-cut young Republicans looking for their first tattoo to impress their tree-hugger girlfriends. As for barflies, well, they're still barflies. But unfortunately, I find the more tats I show, the greater the chance that the cops will throw me into the back of the van if a bar fight breaks out. So I couldn't help being nervous as two officers marched me into City Hall East. City Hall East is in the old Sears building on Ponce de Leon, a great brick fortress squeezed between the empty parking lot that used to serve the Masquerade Dance Club and the full one that serves the Borders bookstore. Once it buzzed with activity, but now, in 2006, it's like a tomb, soon to be demolished and turned into yet another mixed-use development as part of the new Beltline project. Even the snack shop has closed. This is the last year of the grand old building's spooky incarnation as a kind of low-link government outpost. All that's left here are a few Atlanta Police Department offices, more offices for the feds, and some for permits and land planning. And lots of police officers, more than I expected for that time of night, most of them scowling, lots of them muttering, "Look at her. What's she in for? Is she a stripper? If she's under arrest, why isn't she cuffed?" The two officers escorting me, one black, one white, both wearing identical buzz cuts, had no answers for them or for me, just, "The police need to see you now, Miss Frost." "No, you're not under arrest, but it is urgent. Please come with us." Our footsteps echoed hollowly as we walked through a canyon of white tile and glass walls towards the metal detectors. There had briefly been a gallery and shops in this floor, but now empty offices surrounded us like cages, only a few showing signs of life. We paused before the metal detectors, where a fat female officer sat, right hand pumping on her mouse in what could only be Minesweeper. "Anything to declare, Miss Frost?" she asked. Frost. Beyond the barrier, a sharply dressed, Kojak bald, black plainclothes officer perked up at the sound of my name. Andre Rand, my dad's best friend. "Dakota Frost?" "No, I've nothing to declare," I said, trying to ignore him as he stalked briskly towards me. The woman waved me in, and I swept through the metal detector just in time for him to corner me. I sighed, folded my arms, and stared down at the black man. He was tall, but I was taller. Wonderful. He'd known I was coming, and had probably engineered this whole thing. "Dakota," he said, voice forced cheeriness, sparkling eyes genuine. He was twice my age. I'd bounced on his knee when he and my father had been partners, but he was still a fashion plate if you go in for the whole GQ look. "Your dad will be glad to hear you're doing well." "Hey, Ran," I said, smiling, shaking my head, half at his infectious grin and half at whatever he was planning. "Let's get this over with. Where is he, and when did he get in? You know, I do have a cell phone. He could call me. There's no need for the goon squad." Rand's face fell. Your dad's not here, Dakota. We needed to see you." "We?" I asked. Rand's face went stony, blank. "Homicide, Dakota. Homicide needs to see you." We got in the elevator and Rand punched the 6th floor, motioning to me to join him in the back. The officers, big men almost my height, stepped in front of me, making me feel even more like a prisoner, or perhaps someone being guarded. But the guard theory evaporated when a sandy-haired older man slipped past the officers and joined us in the back of the elevator, leering at me and nodding to Rand. "Hey, you old cockroach," he said. After a moment, his eyes slid to me, to my tattooed arms and my bare midriff, then forward to the officers. "Forgot to pay your fees?" he leered. "What the fork?" I asked. "Miss Frost isn't here for floor 5, Jack," Rand said. "She's working with me." "Well, lucky you," the man said, slapping his shoulder. He caught my ticked-off, puzzled look and shrugged, with the conspiratorial leer suppressed, but still trying to peek out. "Floor 5 is where you get your stripper license." "And fork you too," I said. "We don't license for that," Rand said, deadpan. "I'm just saying, girl, you could do the job if you wanted." "Which one of the officers said, and the other one chuckled. "Floor 5 is also where you get your license to do magical tattoos," I snapped, "which always sounds funny until you wake up with a working anus tattooed on your forehead." Suddenly the cab got quiet. The 2 officers stiffened up, and Rand jammed his hands into his pockets and leaned against the back wall of the cab. He was trying to look ticked, but he looked so hot he came off more as a brooding GQ model. But the sandy-haired Jack was staring at the officers, suddenly serious. "Cut the boys a little slack," he warned me. "Things are crazy. You don't want to go to jail tonight, do you?" "Kind of feels like it," I said. "Nobody's going to jail tonight unless it's you, Jack," Rand said. "Already been," Jack replied, not the least bit perturbed. "Second time this week." "Oh, no," Rand said. "Don't tell me your boys messed up bookings." "Nope," Jack said, grinning. "One of your boys tripped a power cord. Again." "Yeez," I said, abruptly hot under the collar. One of the only college jobs I'd enjoyed had been lab tech, and I couldn't stand people who forked up my computers. You should set up a webcam to find out who's doing it. Jack blinked at me, then smiled and said, "Not a bad idea. For a girl." And just when I was starting to warm up to him, "Blow me, you old cockroach." The doors opened, and Jack just grinned. "Not a bad idea either." Jack strolled out to the right and began beeping a door's keypad, and we followed. Once again, our footsteps echoed hollowly down a long, narrow corridor. On the left were conference rooms and APD offices, but on the right was a long wall of tinted glass with a Fed-smelling seal engraved on it. Behind one window, I saw a figure standing, and as I drew closer, I saw dark sunglasses and a devilish goatee. Sunglasses at night, come on. We paused before another key-coded door, and I became acutely aware the man behind the glass was checking me out, staring at me, sipping his government coffee. Finally, I looked over and saw a trim form inside a crisp black suit. He was looking straight back at me, raising his cup towards me in salute, his smile not a leer but appreciation. Jack opened the door with a beep, 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 strolled in, and disappeared into a warren of ratty old cubicles. We followed him through, and the door closed behind us. I looked back at the big, knobbly lock. I was sure you could get out without the code, but it still slowly swung shut with a solid click, and I felt trapped. In moments, I was in a plain white evidence room, looking down on a salt-and-pepper-haired, Greek-looking officer and probably named Vincent Balducci, seated at a large table in front of a large manila folder. There was a side door to the right, and a huge mirror dominated the rest of the wall. If you squinted, you could just see the blinking light of a camera or maybe a video recorder, and I felt the invisible presence of a dark figure somewhere behind the glass. Maybe I was imagining it, but come on, I've seen this movie before. "Taller than I expected, Miss Frost," Balducci said, not moving to greet me as I sat down. My long leather vest coat shushed against the tile as I settled into the chair, but after that, the only noise was the hum of the air conditioning. Rand was seated at the edge of the table, naturally, easily, like an Armani model dressed on a police officer's salary, but losing none of the class. Finally, he seemed to lose patience with Balducci and said, "Show her." "This is pointless," Balducci said. "She can't tell us anything that chickening out." Abruptly, Rand flipped the manila folder open and turned it towards me, then stood and stared at the glass. "What can you tell us about this?" Curious, I stared at the picture. It was a bad photocopy of a circular design, some kind of braided wreath with a chain and snake eating its own tail. Big black blotches covered the upper quarter of the design, but after a moment I puzzled out what I was looking at. "This is Flash," I said. At Balducci's puzzled look, I explained, "A tattoo design, or a part of one." Balducci nodded dismissively. "Told you," he said to Rand. "And?" Rand asked. "And you need to tone down the contrast on your copier?" I said. It was half blotted out, but then I realized it wasn't a photocopy, but some kind of printout of an image, posterized to the point it was almost illegible, with large brush black blotches of a digital pen redacting some of the details. But it still had that distinctive natural look that it meant it started life as a photograph, not a drawing. "This isn't Flash," I said. "It's an actual tattoo." "Told you," Rand said. As my eyes studied it, it became suspicious. The reproduction was terrible, but something about the wreath and chain had the flavor of a magical glyph. What if it was magical? These mundanes would have no way of knowing. But how could I tell from this printout? "Do you have a better picture?" "No, a different picture." Balducci sighed and slipped another piece of paper out of the folder. A similar shot, similarly degraded, but I put the two next to each other and planted my hands on the table, staring down on them. After a moment I saw it. The head of a snake in the design was 3 lengths past the belt of the chain in one, and 5 in the next. It was moving. "This is magical," I said. "This tattoo is moving. It's a magical mark." "Told you," Rand said triumphantly. "Holy," Balducci breathed. I looked up, and I saw him not looking at the Flash, but at my hands. "Hers are doing it too. I swear the forking butterfly flapped." "What, do you think they only moved after?" Rand asked. What do you mean after?" I asked. No one said anything, and my stomach suddenly clenched up. "What do you mean after? You don't mean like after death?" I can't discuss the details of an ongoing investigation," Balducci said. "Why did we bring her here if not to discuss it?" Rand said. "It was your idea," Balducci said. "She's your old partner's daughter." The side door opened. The dark-suited Fed I had seen in the hall walked out. His crisp goatee and short wavy hair made him look more like an evil Johnny Depp than a laid-back Agent Mulder. One hand was in his pocket, the other still holding the cup of coffee. In his dexterous fingers, the styrofoam cup looked like alabaster. "Show her," he said with unassuming authority, "or quit wasting our time." Balducci looked up at a loss. You've got it," he said. The Fed just looked at me, mouth quirking into a smile, at which Balducci touched his head in a senior moment gesture and then hit the intercom. "Rogers," he said. "You got it?" "Yeah. Bring it." After a moment, a tall, drawn man stepped out of a back door I hadn't noticed, gingerly holding a large, white plastic envelope with the same Fed logo on it. The cadaverous man paused in the white light of the doorway for a moment, eyes twitching as he saw me. Not unfriendly, but in pity? Then I noticed a long plastic tray in the man's other hand and saw the padded envelope was bulging with something. I suddenly didn't want to see it. The Fed touched his left ear for a moment, then turned to go. "Aren't you going to stay?" I asked nervously. I wasn't quite sure why I was asking him for reassurance, but there it was. He paused. "I've seen it," he said, and stepped into the blackness. The tray clattered against the table, shockingly close to my hands, and Balducci and I both leaned back a little. The evidence technician, if that's what Cadaver Man was, put on a pair of blue gloves before opening the envelope and withdrawing a smaller, plastic-wrapped object. "Even though it is wrapped," he said, putting it in the tray, "it would help if you do not touch it." My skin grew cold. It was a ripped piece of human skin pinned to a stained wood board. Chapter 2, God's Finest Canvas. I stared in horror at the scrap of human skin, stretched across the board like so much canvas. The braided wreath curved across the flesh, marred by a few small cuts that had been blacked out on the print copy. On most sides, the skin curved over the board, but at the upper left, the skin was torn away, revealing both the blood-stained wood and a set of torn holes in the skin that indicated it had been stapled underneath, like a leather seat cushion. Without another nod to Balducci, Rand took over, channeling Joe Friday. "Do you know what this is?" "It's a tattoo," I said, unable to take my eyes off of it. "Do you know what it means?" "It's a magical ward. To protect against evil spirits?" "No, it's like a capacitor. It collects or deflects magical power," I said, "which depends on the intent of the wearer." "Do you know who inked this?" I'd have to look closer at the design to tell that. I really didn't want to do that. I looked up at Rand, eyes pleading. His face had gone cold, a bit stony, not unfriendly, but all cop. I leaned forward, looked through the clear plastic bag at the wreath, at the inking. The board exposed through the rip was smoothly polished and finely worked, despite the bloodstains. Suddenly, I knew. "Yes, I know the artist," I said. Personally. It's Richard Sumner." "Do you know where he is?" "Buried in Cincinnati," I said. "Sumner was famous, but he died in 2005, I think." "Hell," Balducci said. "That rules out a suspect." "Do you know who this was inked on?" Rand asked. "No," I said, closing my eyes at last. That piece of skin had come from a living human person. I'd really not been trying to think of that. My mind cast around for anything else. Sumner did thousands of people. You could email the Lansing Dragon in Cincinnati, though. Sumner took extensive pictures. They're stored there. Rand smiled. "We'll do that." The smile faded. "Do you know of anyone who had a grudge against Sumner or against any of his subjects?" "No," I said. I don't know anyone who has a grudge against anyone." "Really?" Rand said. "What about against other tattoo artists, especially magical ones?" "According to our newsletter," I said sarcastically, "there are over 200 licensed magical tattoo artists in the United States, so it's a pretty big list." "Could we get a copy of that newsletter?" Rand asked. I thought about it for a moment. "Yes." "Is there anything you'd like to add?" Rand said. "Yes," I said, nodding at the skin-covered board. "I would like to add up. What the fork is that thing?" "Tell her about the box," Balducci said. "What about the box?" I said, eyes drawn back to the thing on the table. "We had a witness," Cadaver Man said. "He didn't live long enough to tell us much, but he mentioned a box. A box covered in scraps of tattooed skin." "Don't tell me more about the box," I said, getting up. "Oh, God, it's a forking lid." "Dakota," Rand said, motioning to Cadaver Man. "You don't need to stay any longer, Dakota, though our friend the Fed may have more questions for you later." "Why did you bring me here?" I said, watching Cadaver Man slip it back into its opaque envelope. "Is this some kind of cruel joke, some kind of arrangement with my dad to get me to come home?" "Dakota," Rand said, "I didn't lie. We did need to see you, and not just for your expertise." Excuse me. "Rand," Balducci warned, "she's just a civvy, and she's just a kid. She's got to know," Rand said, staring up at me with those same sad eyes I remembered looking up to as a child. Dakota, this just fell in our lap, but our friends tell us they've had a dozen killings over the past 5 years where magical tattoos were taken, almost always on or near the full moon, moving from state to state each time. This last one was in Birmingham, and our friends tell us all the signs point to an attack here in Georgia, soon. And the full moon is next weekend, I said, just after Halloween. So you see, Dakota, I needed to talk to you, Rand said. We don't think you're a specific target, but Cody, stay safe. Your dad and I are very worried about you. My childhood nickname rang in my ears as I watched Cadaver Man carry it back through the door of white light. That makes 3 of us, I said. I said my goodbyes to Rand, then got the heck out, escorted by the black and white twin officers who picked me up. Tweedle White and Tweedle Black turned out to be Horst and Gibbs, old buddies of Rand's, who were doing him a favor by scooping me up. Gibbs was a sexy beast, like a younger version of Rand himself, but after staying for the show with the lid, Horst had turned from stony Aryan Nazi to protective den mother. After some arguing, they agreed to take me back to Mary's to pick up my Vespa. But as we started to pull out of City Hall East garage, the colorful lights across the street gave me a better idea. Wait, I said, drop me at the Borders. Are you sure? Horst said. It's a long way to East Atlanta. It's 9:55, I said. I can take care of myself in a brightly lit commercial fortress, and call on a fair slave to cab me back to Mary's for my Vespa. I never leave before midnight anyway. But after seeing that, the full moon is like 10 days away, I said with false bravado. I'm not worried. The lady can take care of herself, Gibbs said, smiling. Anything else we can do? Sure thing, I said. Next time you give me a ride, I want to do it in cuffs. Horst was befuddled, but Gibbs whistled low. Sure thing, girl. But if she hasn't done anything wrong. Dang, Horst, you never got a Sunday morning call? Gibbs said, punching my raised fist gently. I'll explain it to you later. You're all right, girl. Later. I started sniffing around the bookstore for something on Richard Sumner's. It was hopeless. I hate bookstores, and this one was a brightly lit warren. I ferreted around their computer kiosk for a minute, browsing for any of the books I knew. The Craft of Ink? No. Flash Ink? Flash? Out of print. Anything by Richard Sumner's? Yes. One titled Richard Sumner's. 3 in store, shelved improbably in Art and Architecture, Photography monographs, where I had absolutely no luck. Finally, I collared a pimply-faced teen manning the customer service kiosk, whose end-of-day funk brightened considerably as soon as he saw my breasts. Oh yes, that, he said, staring straight at the bulge in my top. In fairness, my breasts were about level with his head, and he seemed scared to make eye contact. Right over here, in bargain books. Richard Sumner's by Tashton, $7.99. Right between Sicily and Pictures and More Amazing Kittens. I wanted to pop a blood vessel, but just stood there, seeing Sumner's life work end up in a bargain rack. Finally, I picked it up, thick little brick, thumbing its thin but curiously heavy pages. At least it's selling, I said. Anything else? He asked, eyeing my breasts again. You got an almanac for 2005? I asked, but he shook his head. As I turned to go, finally his eyes darted upward. That, he said, is one cool-ass shirt. I looked down. Edgar Allan Poe stared upside down at me between the lapels of my coat vest. I'd sewn glitter and sequins into the shirt to jazz it up, and his sparkling eyes had ridden up over the ridge of my breasts. Thanks, I said, but by that point, the kid had fled. I grabbed a maple mocha and camped out in the cafe. There in the ghetto library, as we affectionately called it, I started flipping through this glossy tombstone to Richard Sumner's work, looking for clues to who might have worn the tattoo. Richard's magical inking began before I was born, back in the 60s, but the wreathed snake had a modern flair to its design. I started to see some of the distinctive elements that made of the tattoo crop up in the early 90s section, but it wasn't until Eve of the Millennium that it hit pay dirt. At first, I thought I had it, a man covering his eye with a tattooed hand bearing a mark nearly identical to the one on the lid. But it was too small, and I remember that Sumner didn't design his own flash. He had graphomancers do that for him, just like I did, which meant he ended up reusing the same design. Sure enough, there were 3 other people with similar tattoos, ending with a full-page shot of a young woman with a mark just above her breasts. The tat was close, really close, the same size, on a flat piece of skin, sans belly button or the curve of a shoulder that would have shown up as a wrinkle on the lid. I stared at her. She had sharp, punkish hair like I did, and a sexy come-hither smile. Automatically, I checked out the curves of her breast, pressed beneath one delicate hand. They were full and luscious and looked quite lickable. Then my eyes drifted up to the tat, and I felt queasy. Had I just seen this woman in the flesh torn from her chest and stapled to a board like a seat cushion? There was no way to know. I'd give the book to Rand at the first opportunity and hope he could find out. But then I started thinking, Sumner's was tattooed himself, and some of those tats had to be marks of great magical power. I flipped to the bio, trying to find out a clue about how he died, but it was no help. It had been printed in 2003, and the most interesting piece of information was that Sumner's had recently had his hands insured with Lloyd's of London for over $1 million. Useless. I'd originally gotten the book to try to find out who'd worn that tattoo, but now here was a new question. Did Sumner's die near a full moon? And then a creepy voice breathed in my ear. Give me some skin, Dakota. End chapter 2.